This is an exhibition dedicated to cinema. We had to have an element of cinema today, but I hope you enjoyed the film that you saw. And I think it really opens up the context of assessing performances of actresses in 20th century Bengal. And I figured there was nobody better to join us in this conversation than Dr. Trina Nilina Banerjee and Dr. Modhuja Mukherjee. I'm going to just briefly mention a few lines to kind of contextualize Arundhati's life and the times she lived in and acted in. Then I'm going to introduce Trina and Modhujadi, and Modhujadi will start the session really. And she's going to be, of course, looking at Arundhati's performances across different roles in her career. And she's also going to be comparing her with other stars like Suchitra Sen and Supriya Chaudhary, looking at where the differences lie, and then also assessing this aspect of actresses becoming directors, because Modhujadi herself is a director also, so I think she has had personal experience of this particular world. And then I would like Trina Di to actually weigh in again on this aspect of performance. Trina Di is specifically referring to this article that Arundhati wrote on Obhinoy Shilpo. And she's also going to be looking at this aspect of realism within melodrama. How do you navigate this space? And again, what were some of the methods that actresses turned to? Also looking at actresses' writings. And I think I can then open up the question also about autobiographies, how they were presented in media of that particular time and what was their relationship with the media. I think specifically I would like to mention this aspect that Arundhati is coming into cinema in the 1950s. And if any of you have gone through the exhibition, you would know that 1950s is of course marked by the aftermath of partition in Bengal. And on the one hand, there has been this kind of deep sense of cultural loss, but there's an attempt to kind of regain a certain Bhadralok identity. And this is where this entire aspect of the Bhadra Mohila actress comes in. And Arundhati really fits that bill, given her own cultural training and also her introduction through new theatres. Then though, the decades after that take her in different ways. And, there's the opening up of a certain kind of intellectual but also commercial cinema that is created by people like Oshit Sen as well as Ojoy Kaur and Tapan Sinha. Then there's also people like Ray and Mrinal Sen who are coming into the picture. Although Arundhati never really works with Ray. I remember in a conversation with my uncle, he recounted how they did have conversations. Ray had considered her for the role of Bimola in Ghore Baire. And at that point of time, Arundhati could not give her commitment to the project. But the one thing she did tell Ray is that if if I had had any say in the way in which you made the Opu trilogy, I would have probably given a bit more prominence to the role of Leela. So she was always interested in women characters also. And that sort of feminine gaze as well as approach comes through in her acting, and as I said, even moves into the way in which she imagines things in her directorial films. So we'll be looking at a whole gamut of things. Let me just begin by introducing Modhujadi and Trina Di. Modhuja Mukherjee is a professor of film studies at Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and she's vice chair of Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Society. Her first monograph is on new theatres and film studios in Bengal, 1931 to 1951. She's edited the Reader's Oral Films, Oral Cultures, Voices of the Talking Stars. She's also co-edited Popular Cinema in Bengal, Industrial Networks and Cinemas of India, Wondrous Screens in India. Mukherjee wrote the screenplay of the internationally acclaimed film Kissa, And her feature films as director premiered at the International Film Festival of Rotterdam and at the Busan International Film Festival. Mukherjee is currently working on the industrial history of Bombay cinema, 1947 to 1972, through the lens of kinship, industrial ecology, and slowness of film production. And Modhujadi has actually been of great help for this project in all the insights she provided me with, especially with this aspect of women working within the industry at that point of time. What were some of the guidelines? What were, pay structures? What were labor systems like, really? So these are not things I could easily gain just by looking at the pictures and booklets. So she's really been a wealth of information. And for Trinadi has a master's in English from Jadavpur University, and she followed it up with a PhD from Oxford University. For her PhD, she worked on the history of women in the group theatre movement in Bengal between 1950 and 1980. She's also been researching women's movements in political theatre in Manipur. Her essays and reviews on different subjects have appeared in various international journals and edited volumes. She is currently an assistant professor in cultural studies at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta. Her research interests include gender, performance, political theatre, theories of the body, post-colonial theatre, and South Asian history. And her most recent book is called Performing Silence, Women in the Group Theatre Movement in Bengal, which was published by Oxford University in 2021. So over to Modhujadi first, and then Trina, and then I'm going to ask a few questions and open it up to the audience as well.
Thank you very much, and congratulations, Mrinalini and Topotiti, because I think this is a hugely important exhibition in the way, because my interests lie in the film industry and the histories of labor, histories of how women work, how do we even describe film work. And when so much of material is ephemeral and so much of material, so many films are lost, how do we do histories? And I find this this exhibition, therefore, a very important intervention in the series of centenaries that we've been celebrating. So it's hard to initiate a conversation on an actor who is such a pivotal figure within the history of Bengali cinema. Like when we talk about Bangla cinema, we talk about few figures, directors, actors, and films, and which is, despite Arundhati Devi's rather, comparatively or relatively short list of films. So that is a point of entry for me, to think that how does a filmmaker or an actor with, let's say, not a huge long list, become an important figure in the ways in which we look at history of Bangla cinema, or a major bulk of Bangla cinema, post-50s, post-independence, which dealt with the question of being modern, the new kind of post-partition city, and the kind of jobs that women were taking up, or the crisis of relationship. So to begin with, I was thinking, how does one describe her on-screen persona? What is Arundhati Devi on screen? How do we read that from, let's say, the ways in which we look at stardom more critically, within film studies or within media studies and cinema studies? What is a star? How does it sort of spill over into other kinds of media, maybe photograph, maybe other kinds of publicity images, and also how does personal stories, even gossips for that matter, feed into the construction of that figure that we see on screen. So it is in this that I sort of thought I was looking into the films, and I have seen more or less all films that are available. So it is interesting to think of her the early films, let's say. You know, one thing that she joins the film industry relatively at a mature age, almost he's already 30. So that is a kind of persona, you know, that's a kind of experience that she brings onto the screen. So initially, you know, I'm thinking of two films. One which I have seen posters and images, publicity images, is Doshu Mohan, and which is a very unlikely film that you connect with the kind of gravitas that the persona that she had on screen. And the other is Chelekar. It is Chelekar, and you know, which is a more within the domain of comedy, for that matter. And it is interesting to see what she represents there. In some ways, whatever role she is playing, it is impossible to think of her as a demure character. There is a kind of a person. It does not matter to which, you know, the class the character belongs, or you know, what she is doing, but the kind of you know, in fact, she's not only a working woman in most of the films, but she's also very talkative and argumentative woman, and that there is a way in which, and that itself is something really important if we think of some of the key films of the other actors of the time, especially if you consider Suchitra Sen or Supriya Chaudhuri, Madhavi Mukherjee or Sandhya Rai, some of the major, but others as well, especially Manju De, Anubha Gupta, and others. But I was because we saw Chola Chol, and I was thinking of how do we read the stardom more critically from where I stand, let's say from within the scope of film studies, that let's think of Shaptapadi, where Suchitra Sen also plays a doctor. But there is a kind of a visual economy and a narrative economy here, and the kind of investments that are there. Let's say Suchitra Sen's the close-ups, the sort of iconic close-ups, her head held high, and there is a sort of a slightly low-angle close-up with a typical kind of a 1940s, 50s classical Hollywood kind of light on the face. Which is remarkably different in the way they light, let's say, Arundhati Devi's face. You know, the kind of the strong highlight or a shadow under the nose and the chin, and that kind of iconic image making, which is, and Suchitra Sen's, because of the nature of stardom, those close-ups stand, you know, they are almost extra diegetic. They are even sometimes outside the narrative. This is the face of a star. So why I'm making this comparison? Because you know, Suchitra also played very strong characters. She's a teacher in Indrani, or there is a in other films, you cannot think of her as a demure figure, but there's a difference in the ways in which two personas operate. And how do I therefore look at this, the question of actress, and what is she doing to the screen? And it is this kind of a realism about which she talks in also the article that is here also on display. It is this. You know, she's part of the space. She's part of that that story that is being told. There is the light on her face never creates that poster pin-up kind of an image. So it is, and the way she performs with her voice, and the way she performs in the context. So it is this kind of, let's say, the kind of investment, like if I was thinking of the various films in which, let's say Shuchitra in Shaptapadi, there is no part of a profession in the storytelling, because that is not required. That is not the kind of persona that is there on the screen. Here in Chola Chol, right from the beginning, there's such detailing of that she has a job, she has to do her job well, and the entire film is about that. So those are the kinds of interesting things that one can talk about. Or let's say Jyotu Griho. And in some ways, I see the continuity in terms of performance, in terms of the persona, even from Chelekar to, let's say, Chol to Jyotu Griho, and as though it's a particular kind of a Bhadra Mohila, educated, and she in control of her situation. That there is even if she is, even if, let's say, it is not dealt with in the film, in the storytelling, we know that she belongs to a certain kind of a context. Jyotu Griho, that she is a teacher, and it flows almost, that it's the persona that allows that kind of a opening up, that she can choose to be a teacher. We don't have to tell the story that, then she went to college, then she went to these places, and then therefore she is a teacher. It's a kind of a persona that is drawn from other texts, a kind of intertextual relation. But also, I was thinking that the kind of crisis, especially with the Hindu Marriage Act in 1955, the crisis of the couple, marriage. Even in Cholachol, it's repeatedly said, kagojer biye, kagojta chhire phellei hoy, and so on. Or in Jyotu Griho, where divorce becomes important. It is very interesting that how Arundhati came to represent and even embody that kind of a post-partition, post-independence kind of a crisis of being modern. And that itself, her face, the way she stands despite quite a petite kind of a figure, and then and the way the scenes are, let's say the short breakdowns, and how I would read it, and then this entire persona that flows from one film to the other to sort of embody a moment, a historical moment. And that, it is in this context that I really want to talk a bit about. There's another film that I really want to mention, in Bicharok, where it's like a deep, a collective crisis that the figure has to resolve. It's a huge crisis, the questions of law comes up in majority of the popular films of the period. There is this sort of, towards the end of the film, there is a courtroom scene where there is entire sort of family and nation is brought together into that kind of a space. So, but in Bicharok, something interesting happens. It happens that she pushes the judge to admit, to confess himself. And it is as though she is the sort of moral compass, and as though she is the ethical figure, the Bhadra Mohila and the woman and the bearer of so many stories. That embodiment itself is very, very interesting. The other, so it is in this context that I really want to briefly talk about Chuti, because for me, this figure of Arundhati representing really a historical moment, and I think the way her image is created on the screen and the characters she plays, she comes to represent more than anybody else of her time as a representative figure of being modern. And it is, I was thinking that Jyotogriho is produced by Uttam Kumar, so it is in that kind of a critical story that you have somebody like Arundhati Devi to play out the crisis. But Chuti then, and I sincerely love the film, you know that. And it is not because one has to invent or find a woman filmmaker of the period. It does not come from there. It comes from a question, of course, that why, all the women filmmakers' films are lost. And we're not talking about 30s, 40s and the fire and new theaters films or other films gone in fire. We're talking about 60s. And the majority of the films have survived, but Arundhati Devi's, and also for that matter, Manju De's directorial films have not survived. So it is not, but it is not finding, Bangla bolle kumire chana, that, here is the first woman filmmaker, here is a film which must be good. It is what I find interesting, that is that the year the film is made, and there is the film Hate Bajare, there is the film Chiriyakhana, all receiving national awards. And this film also receives a national award. And if you watch these films, if you compare these films, you will find that, let's say the editing, the style of narration, the amount of time spent with the characters, the figure of the male figure, there is something specific if we talk about a woman's, a woman's lens looking at a situation. That's the opening sequence of Chuti. You have the landscape and a woman's voice. It's a haunting kind of a voice, very lengthy kind of scene. I suspect, many of the contemporary directors, male of course, would not have spent that much of time with the character, with the woman in concern, this young woman who falls in love at the time she is dying. And so it is about her sexuality, it is about her knowing this man, it is about also knowing death at the same time. This kind of complexity, and I've mentioned this, but maybe I just want to emphasize, I have not seen any film of that period or later, and I did show this film more recently in a lecture that I was delivering, and that I have not seen of that period. Think of Uttam Kumar's figure in Chiriyakhana. He's so smart, he's so suave, sharp niye khela kore. And here is this man, who is a young person who is spending his afternoon with two young girls. I mean, and that kind of a characterization. Or let's say this entire sequence when the girl, when this man says that he's just had a smoke, and he says, "Dekho to amar mukhe gandho ache kina." And then this longest sequence of the landscape, the woman going around, and the music, and intercepted by her expression, "Dekho, dekho," and it goes on and on. That moment, that kind of cinematic time, that kind of storytelling is, and I also, I think that because directors do that, in young Nandini Malia's voice, there is that grain of voice of Arundhati in the way she expresses, in End of Jyotogriho, she says, the kind of voice and expression that she has about je ageo je badha chilo ekhono ache, so there is a I see a directorial eye, And I think it is very important to look at that style, that, let's say, slowness of storytelling compared to the sharp cuts, the smartness of the films of the period. And that is a kind of a figuration that I see in her on-screen persona as well. So, yeah, I think I'll stop here now, and maybe we have conversation later.
So, first of all, huge congratulations once again to Mrinalini and Taupodidi for having managed to do this massive, piece of work. I mean, I've not managed to see it with enough attention yet, but the little I have seen, it's really, really impressive, and it's such important work. Also, thank you for asking me to speak today. I am not, unlike Motuja, a film person. I'm not a film studies person at all. But I will kind of speak about some of the thematic questions that resonate with my own work when I think about Arundhati Devi's remarkable life and career. And also an essay that Mrinalini sent to us, to both Madhuja and myself, when we were preparing for this, this panel. And as I read it about 3 times over the last few days. And every time I read it, I was completely overwhelmed by how remarkable a piece of writing it is, and also filled simultaneously with a kind of regret that there is not enough writing that we have from her, because what she has managed to do, and I say this with kind of absolutely, as somebody who's looking at performance studies and performance theories in the present moment, the density of that piece and the complexity of the thinking that she displays there is incredible. And I want to talk about a couple of points, and then I will spend the entire time that I have actually talking about that essay, because I was so deeply moved by it. So some of the things that I will say will kind of resonate with and be in dialogue with what Madhuja already has said, and kind of looking at it from my my own work and my own perspective. So Arundhati Devi, I remember, now I come at it now as a scholar, come towards her as a scholar, but I remember watching her films when I was growing up, because my grandmother was a huge fan of Arundhati Devi. And so we watched pretty much all her films whenever they were on television or otherwise on, when they were available. And I remember not being quite so put off by, I was quite put off by a lot of the femininity that I saw in the Bengali films of that period, because there was a certain way that one was, I think, even then I felt that one was being asked to perform the feminine role. And with Arundhati Devi, I just remember these, even now watching Chola Chola, I felt this, that there's this simple, small thing, that this profusion of images of her thinking, just thinking, a blank moment where she is in fact contemplating something. So a woman still on screen thinking, just that image is so rare to come upon, and that gives you such a sense of seeing yourself there and being allowed to have the space to think. That's just such a luxury even now as a woman. So that in itself, I think, was, I mean, when you're talking about a screen persona, I think that is one of the little things that, remain with me.
Srinathi,
Yeah.
sorry, there was one thing I wanted to add here.
Yeah.
Since you were talking about a woman thinking, Paromita Vora wrote a very nice piece on Vidya Sinha, which was about her thinking across all of her films, and that was.
Yeah. So I found in her perhaps a kind of, in the image that came through in most of her films, a kind of femininity that perhaps I could speak to. So that did not alienate me, even at that age. But one of the most significant things, and I'm drawing here from a very, very beautiful piece that Mrinalini herself has written for Critical Collective on Arundhati Devi recently, where she talks about the emergence of the figure of the woman professional, right? And this is one of the questions that I was looking at in great detail when I was looking at the group theatre movement in Bengal and around the same period. Talking about the question of labor and the question of a woman working, right? And in that chapter, I had looked in kind of great detail, somewhat eccentrically, at the film Mahanagar. Because so many different ways, in fact, the question of a working woman, the image of a working woman comes up in that film, and small details, not even in the major plot points. For example, where Arati is selling the sewing machines and she meets her husband's friend in a cafe. Now, this is also interesting because you have a public space, a cafe, a tea shop, a road, where men and women meet each other as cohorts, as friends, as colleagues, as passers-by. That itself is a new thing, right? Because Arati has stepped out, it is sociologically, historically, kind of a new thing. And there she says, she's asked, what are you selling? And Arati says, sewing machines. And the man immediately responds, মেয়েদের কি আর কোনো কাজই করতে দেবেন না নাকি আপনারা? So the fact that all domestic work is now being mechanized is in fact a threat to the kind of labor that is expected of women at home, and that labor is continuously read as nurture and care and not labor, right? And corollary to this is the question of how do we then read the figure of the working woman? As long as her role is an extension of her duties as the housewife, because as she meets the needs of the household, it's fine. The moment sort of a tinge of excess arrives in that scenario represented by the lipstick, everything falls apart. All hell breaks loose, right? So in this scenario then, how do we see the laboring figure of the woman artist? That's the question. Where in fact, perhaps economic remuneration or a financial, a kind of sustenance is not really the driving force of that profession. In the theatre, definitely not, and I'm sure with somebody like Arundhati Devi's career, it's like you said, not a huge list of films to talk about. It was not really a question of making ends meet or making money, etc. So then there is something else that defines feminine cultural labor, that has to justify feminine cultural labor, and that is and it's very hard. It's a very precarious kind of a very sort of tightrope kind of walk, which connects with another sort of phrase that in fact the exhibition uses, and which is the title of one of my chapters in the book, which is the question of the Bhadra Mohila actress, right? Where several of these sort of vectors come together. The question of labor, the question of the justification, ideological, economic or otherwise, of that labor, but also the question of respectability. How does this actress in the 50s and 60s set herself apart from the shadow of the actress of the 19th and early 20th centuries? And there are ways in which this is a constant, and it's not like I've tried to argue in the book, it's a very unstable compound, that Bhadra Mohila hyphen actress, the hyphen is not stable at all. So you're constantly threatening to slip into a kind of a historical space where your status as Bhadra Mohila can be put into question by the second part of that compound, which is the actress, right? So therefore, that's an interesting thing, and this is where one kind of longs for an archive. One would have liked to know what kind of, in this kind of this image that we have of her as a strong, confident, modern woman, what kind of messiness, what kind of shadows she might have faced, what kind of conflicts she might have faced, and it would have been interesting to know. But this is where also women's autobiographies are always also, even when there exists an autobiography, it is either framed by a male authorial voice, and like in the case of Binodini, we know very well. But if you read even Tripti Mitro's reminiscences, which are kind of fragmented and sort of not very well organized, you find that there is more unsaid than that there is, that is said, that is explicit. So one is constantly reading between the lines to find the story of what might have really been going on. So so then I think one of the other kind of vectors that I would like to talk about, and which also connects to Chuti, the film that Madhuja was speaking about, which is that I think one of the defining features of the artists, actors, actresses, creative people from the 50s and 60s, which also comes out in the essay that is on display here as well, is the notion that there is a certain sense of the artist as a public figure, right? Whether it's an actor, whether one is talking about an actress, whether one is talking about a writer or a director. In the case of theatre, for example, the 50s are defined or driven by a sense of theatre being nation's work, that there is a certain element of nation building, which then justifies a lot of the kind of labor that goes into it. But there is a sort of, I will draw here from an essay by Susie Tharu called Citizenship and Its Discontents, which is actually part of my feminism course. We teach it in class as well, where she draws on Madhav Prasad's formulation, and Madhav Prasad again draws from Geeta Kapoor, where she talks about the figure of the executive artist in the 50s. The notion that in a sense the artist is executing the nation's work, and there is a certain kind of a pedagogic function in that role. So it is not simply the artist as citizen, but the artist as a certain special kind of citizen, a kind of a singularity, but there is a pedagogic function. There is a sense of not really a vanguard, but definitely a sense that there is a pedagogic function. And I think there is a certain kind of frontality in this role, a sense that, this is a straight, linear narrative, right? And Susie Tharu in this piece brilliantly argues, she's talking about a Gujarati woman writer of the 50s and 60s called Saroj Pathak, and says that there is an underbelly to this frontality. And that underbelly might be confusion, might be messiness, might sometimes be, in fact, what I think in the case of Arundhati Debe is very true, a certain kind of melancholy, intense melancholy, which is what I took away from a film like Chuti. The sense that there is a story of modernity and suddenly you're off-center on this landscape which is neither urban, not quite typically rural either, and you have a figure who's been left behind. And it's the story of that figure which is left behind, a girl, not particularly ambitious, unlike many of the characters that Arundhati herself played, not particularly ambitious, not very strong, not articulate, inward-looking, shy, and there a deep, deep sense of melancholy and an encounter with love and death at the same time, very different from the characters that she herself has played in screen, which is very interesting to me. Very interesting, right? So she's so then there's this, I feel constantly what makes these works so interesting is that there is this messy relationship with modernity. It's not easy. Right? So there is that frontality of the doctor walking towards the screen in a determined fashion. But when she makes a film about a girl who gets left behind in every which way. Right? So then that dichotomy somewhere needs to be addressed. How much time do I have? Yeah, sure, absolutely. I just want to quickly talk about this essay because I think all of you must read it. So it's called Cholochitra Shilpo Shilpi. It was published on the 26th of Jan 1960 in Anandabajar. And Arundhati starts by saying that there is no grammar of film acting, just like there's no grammar of life. And I feel what acting should be, obhinay ki hobe, the pulse, in the pulse of life, in the public space. She says, প্রশস্ত রাজপথে মানুষের মিছিলে আমি পাই অভিনয় মানে আমার কাজের স্পন্দন. So the pulse of life, so like I said, the public role of the artist is what drives her. Like so the very first definition of it is, if I find what my art should be, it is in the Rajpath amongst the people. And this, of course, immediately for me resonates with how perhaps a decade or a little more earlier, Tripti Mitra would have spoken of her work in Nabanno and how, in fact, running the Longor Khana by the day and performing Nabanno by the night, there was really no separation between life and art for a while at least, almost miraculously. And it seems as if Arundhati Debi is suggesting that there is a space like that, which should be the ideal space from which performance comes. So then there is the actor's public role, but she then goes on to spend the rest of the essay to talk about the internal landscape of the artist, the actress, and how it may relate to the expression that forms the character, right? And the central question that she's trying to, I mean, kind of see it kind of on the around the middle of the article, is it, and I feel like she's having an argument with an absent interlocutor here, someone who has said to her that within the neorealist mode of filmmaking, the actor is not a creator. He's merely somebody, she's merely somebody who's mimicking life. So mimesis is the end of her role and there is nothing more. And it's as if the whole essay is an argument against this invisible interlocutor to whom she's trying to say that that's not it, that's not enough. So she says that my work as an actor comes from an intimate sense of life, Jibon Bodh, living deeply. I take inspiration from life, and in this sense, the actor is a Jibon Shilpi, and I think I can hear echoes of Tagore quite clearly here, because her early education was, in fact, in Vishwabharati. But she's not speaking about mimesis or representation here. She's speaking about something beyond. And she's asking, what is the actor's role? Is it that of an artist? Is it that of someone who creates? How can it be if she's simply reproducing life on screen? And then she spends a long time talking about stage acting. And she says, I have not had the experience of working on stage a lot, but the little that I have done, it seems to me that stage acting must be bound far more by grammar and stylization and rules. And film acting, I find, is a free space where the actor can roam. And this is a very strange thing, because most often the opposite is said. If you think about Walter Benjamin's The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, what Benjamin is also saying is that the aura of the stage actor's presence is destroyed by the fragmentation that he faces in front of the camera. But she's making a very unique kind of argument. She says the film acting gives me freedom to roam. It gives me the freedom to express the nuances of emotion and expression, which may not be very easy on the stage unless one is a great artist, right? But on the other hand, she says, because I come much more intimately close to the real, I'm closer to life. And she is probably also, to me, it seems, suggesting that film acting is a democratizing shift, that one is actually reaching closer to a certain kind of everyday affectivity, right? But she says that there may be no rules or grammar in the way that stage acting has in film acting, but there is the direction of feeling. So feeling gives you direction. So she says, Onubhaber nirdesh, abeger nirdesh, erom ekta kichu. So, and she says that on the screen, there is no space for untruth and no space to disguise. And so therefore, whatever emotion you're portraying, you must feel with your entire being. And how can you feel every emotion on text with your entire being? By living deeply. So therefore, when you're representing the character, you're not simply stepping into a shell which has been made for you. Even when realism is the goal, the actor's singularity, the specificity of her experiences, the specificity of her personality, help her to embody the role. So she's saying that this does not happen by the disappearance of the actor's personality, but a certain kind of embodiment where both the character and the actor come together, like a palimpsest. This is the argument she's making. And it's a very, very nuanced, I think, and very, very interesting argument. And something that when I teach performance theory today, I keep trying to get at all the time, which is that we have to stop thinking about representation and start thinking about embodiment and embodied processes, right? And she's making this argument in 1960. Right? She says that it does not matter if I'm only trying to represent the real. In representing the real, my entire history of embodied experience will bring that character a certain kind of singularity which makes me a creator. So it's written in a very, very humble tone, but she is making a very big claim. You know, she says, you cannot tell me just because this is a neorealist mode or whatever else that you're trying to say, tell me, is that I'm only following directions and kind of, I'm a puppet. I'm creating this role because you cannot. So she then says that there is no reality without embodiment. So you cannot have reality in abstraction. It's because I embody the character that it becomes real, right? And she then says that it is in a sense, sometimes, she says that শিশির ভাদুরীর ক্ষেত্রে অরঙ্গজেবকে আমরা ইমাজিন করতে পারি কেন আমরা শিশির ভাদুরীর শরীরটা সেখানে শরীর কথাটা ইউজ করেন না বিকজ আমরা শিশির ভাদুরীকে সামনে দেখতে পাই তারপরে উনি বলছেন তো ইতিহাসের কথা বলতে হবে না আমরা আশেপাশের সত্য যেটা আমাদের সব থেকে কাছের যে ইন্টিমেট ট্রুথস দ্যাট অলসো বিকামস ভিজিবল টু আস when it is embodied in a creative space. So therefore, what she's actually suggesting is that performance defamiliarizes the real also, so that we are able to perceive it anew. She's making a very, very, it's hardly a 1,500 word essay, but it's so complex, and I think you could write reams about it. I think it should be translated. And I ended the whole thing with this immense regret that she did not write more, or if she did, we don't have what she did write. So, oh, and also one last thing, that Minka, you wrote about intellectualism of her figure but one of the things that she's, I think, constantly reiterating here is that for the true actor, one cannot differentiate between affect and intellect. It's the operation of both. One, the kind of the meaning-making work of the intellect, and two, the affective work of embodiment that must come together for a performance to become real.
Add quickly, because thank you so much. So when you were talking about the time that one takes to live this sort of moment or the embodiment of an emotion. And it's very interesting the kind of gestures that she has, right? So there's one part of the shot-taking part where, let's say, there isn't that kind of a highlight, half her face is not visible or her face is turned and so on. But let's say the simply gesture of, let's say, picking up a glass and the time that she takes, you know, there is every frame that is an embodiment of a character and you know, she becomes on screen, and that kind of embodiment of a historical time, which is so important in the way it travels from one film to the other, to a more sort of a critical gesture in her own work, which is Chuti. And yeah, so it's wonderful that you brought this up. You know, it's so important for us to understand what does this body of the actor do on the screen, and how do they operate through different registers. There's one more thing about this exhibition which I wanted to mention, is that her scripts and her, you know, work, how she planned Chuti is there. So I would suggest that all of you take a look. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, can you hear me on this mic? Yeah. For me, this aspect of having the working files was important because sometimes it would be like, it might seem like just a dry correspondence with somebody about. I'm not. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, one of the reasons, as I said, the working files for me was very important was because it really gave you a different kind of insight into lots of daily, what you might even think of as very, humdrum or administrative things, etc. But it's also insights into the way in which you plan, you manage, you organize things, etc. And a kind of way in which she moved between the personal and the professional worlds. And she took one set of skills, in fact, into the other field also. But thank you, Trinadi and Modhujadi, for that lovely discussion, and as well as for your insights on this subject. One of the things that I had, and it's actually quite a basic question, because you were talking about this aspect of realism. there's a way in which melodrama as a format dominates a lot of the films of the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And yet there are actresses who are trying to bring in these other kinds of nuances, etc. How are they trying to contribute or change the scene? Is there any way in which they can do that? Have there been any other actresses who've reflected on methods? Like, because there was no case of going to acting school, etc. So what were some of the things that they were following or, trying to imbibe? If either of you were, and you can reflect from the perspective of theater, from cinema, whether there were directors who were also specifically guiding, whether new theaters, for example, had a specific vision, in fact, for the way they wanted things.
So, there's one thing that the films that all of them are performing in, these are all in a more broadly speaking, these are melodramas. So she is in melodramas. Right. However, there's something interesting that, within film studies, we've been able to look more critically, especially in the work of especially new theaters, and that kind of practice that is brought into Bimal Roy and in then in certain cases Hindi cinema, but also in Bangla films, is that there are moments when realism and melodrama, they collapse, they come together. So let's say a description which is in New Theatre's case we describe as a kind of a reality effect. So let's say a scene, a setting is realistically done and the performance are realistic, then let's say even in Chalachal, that then there is a news of a death that disturbs this kind of a realistic setting. So it is this very interesting kind of a situation that we are talking. Yeah, but because that is a style that grows from especially from new theaters, that there is a kind of a detailing of let's say sets. So it is not like, let's say, a contemporary production house like Bharat Lokhi, let's say, where there is more sort of a stylistic imaginary and sort of a more representative kind of setting. There is far more kind of detailing in the way how let's say a doctor works, or what is a house, what is a what is a middle class house, what is a underclasses house, what is a elite house, and that kind of thing, movement, gesture, clothes. And then there is a kind of a plot element that is melodramatic. So that itself is a very, very interesting situation in which she is caught, and she is able to perform in a way that that moment when, let's say, she breaks down, and it is not neither the shot taking. Let's say in Chalachal, she's back to camera. She slides down the door. It's gesture. It's a body. It's like a dance. Let's say. So it is not like you have close-ups and then you have somebody screaming. It is the entire sort of the mise-en-scene and the shot taking is in around those lines. So that it is, I would say that, maybe in some ways it is comparable to also Madhavi Mukhopadhyay acting in these mainstream films, and had written for, in fact, for Critical Collective an article on her smirk, and that is carried from one film to the other, and one sees, because an actor is a creative person, there are gestures, there are key sort of secret kind of ways in which they operate, like a musician or like a dancer. So I think about learning, I would say that actually through the 30s, 40s, there was a lot on especially European films as well as in Hollywood films, and in translated in Bangla, also in English. You know, there were these huge range of yeah, magazines, Filmland, then Deepali, Chitraponji, and so on, where there are these very long. I mean, you would wonder that why would Deepali have a very long piece, or you know, translation by Mae West, and it's Ami Mae West Bolchi. You know, so because these magazines also sort of were yeah, as trade journals, and they would have these kinds of early, very early ones, 31 or something, would have that this is bhoyer obhinoy, eta, and those kinds of performative kind of photographs. But I think a lot about the actors, both in Hollywood and in Europe, were available in the way, how does one perform a scene? What do you actually do to express that kind of a feeling? So, but in her case, I find that, you know, she buys that time for herself, and I find that in like a singer, like alap, you know, you cannot edit at that point. She's taking that time, so which is, and she's thinking, and she is sort of performing it in a particular, which you see in the, even in the narrative style of Chuti, I would say. So yeah.
Just quickly, so for example, there's a very interesting anecdote with Tripti Mitra when she's asked about her performance in Naban, or she's not asked, she's writing in her these, I can't even call it an autobiography, these are like these fragmented reminiscences that she had. And she said that we were often asked how as middle class, you know, young people, we managed to perform the roles of these destitutes who had come from the villages and were dying of hunger, and how is it that, and she said that, well, there was no question of how did we know them, because we saw them every day. They were, you know, we ran the Langar Khana. There's a sense that the question of verisimilitude simply does not arise, because this is the reality that we are living. And she's talking about one day how she was trying to feed one of these people who had come to get food at the Langar Khana, and the person just died on her arms. You know, and she said that there was no question of, we were not even thinking of techniques and methods. Those questions came much later, when you know, she became part of Bohurupi, etc. But the thing is, I think there is, and I think Mohanduja is absolutely right. I think this shift between having a certain kind of, not realism, but reality effect, verisimilitude in the way that the scene is constructed, and then these moments when suddenly everything breaks into melodrama, was also, I think, part of how theatre aesthetics was framing itself. Yeah, and I think, I mean, and I would have to go back to Utpal Datta here, who argues about melodrama, you know, that in the Indian context it has to be thought completely differently, these categories. You can't, you know.
I do have other questions, but I'd like to open it up to the audience. In case anybody does want to ask, could you please raise your hands? Okay.
I have a question for which Madhujadi or Trinadi can take. I wanted to ask whether Arundhati Devi, how does she measure up against the two other female directors who entered the Bengali film scene around the same time, Monju De and Kanun Devi? I mean, Kanun Devi didn't direct, I know, but she opened her own studio, right? And Monju Dev, the two films that we know of are Shajarur Kata by Sharadindu and Obhishapta Chambol by Tarun Kumar Bhaduri. So she was not co-opting, but she was appropriating what we would consider male genres. So how do we configure Arundhati Devi in that context?
This is something, I mean, I don't know anything about acting, so I'm just asking you that I've heard many times or read in many places that whether it's an actor or an actress, we call them good actors or good actresses when they are able to sort of become that character, whatever they are playing. So does that mean that their identity So for example, if I talk about Arundhati Devi, when I was watching this film, Chala Chal, of course she performed very well in the film, but constantly, I mean, this may be my take, but constantly I was also aware of the fact that she is Arundhati Devi. I mean, I can't think of anybody else there. So this idea about negating yourself completely, does that really work? And or is it the other way around, that if you have that, I mean, if you can make out that she's Arundhati Devi, she actually brings into the character that individuality, which another person will not be, because every person is different.
Actually, Kanon Devi, she's producing the films, right? And the films that Rajlokhi Srikanto, let's say. And that is an important film, but she is not directing. And we cannot make this comparison in thin air because we have not seen Monju De's. I would have loved to, but we haven't. But what is interesting is that the delayed response in Bangla film industry, because by the 30s there are several producers in Bombay. So this kind of a delayed condition, you know, a historical moment or an industrial moment, where at a certain time we have so many directors, producers, and then this interesting kind of a shift that is possible, that we can see that women begin to think beyond being actors and begin to sort of think of making films. Yeah, but I don't think it is either necessary or, you know, it's possible to make these comparisons because they operate through different registers and we do not even have, you know, I would rather make comparisons not with Kanon Bala and with Monju De, but with Tapan Sinha, with Satyajit Ray, with Torun Majumdar, and make this argument that this is an important film, you know, and not make a category of women filmmakers and put them and wait another 100 years to have this conversation. I'll just quickly respond to what you're saying, because stardom operates in that way, that you are playing the character and you are also playing yourself. That is the nature of film stardom, and that is a thing that we, in fact, critically study using, you know, terms like intertextuality, screen persona, and how it travels from one film to the. So there are many stars who operate like that. That they are, even for that matter, let's say Amitabh Bachchan, you know, playing so many times Vijay, but the Vijay in Diwar and the Vijay in Agnipath are different, but they are all Amitabh Bachchan. So actors are maybe only compared to with I would say proficient musicians and so on. I mean, yeah.
I think the reason we've always highlighted this aspect that she never saw herself as a star, because I think she did make it clear that, and when we're thinking of stardom here, we are thinking of a certain kind of glamorous role within the public world. And somewhere, in fact, I think she did not necessarily care much for that glamour bit of it. There could be many more people who have even more signature effects that they bring, in fact, to a role. Like, as I said, the reason why a Shupriya or a Uttom, in fact, have been made this a certain way is because they probably brought that. And maybe there's a way in which Arundhati could slip into, in fact, other roles. Having said that, as I said, ultimately she did choose roles that were closest to her personality and life in many ways. Like, she told herself that it's within these restricted roles that I'm going to show my skills. So there's no denying the fact that there was something of her own that she always brought to these roles. But the stardom bit, in fact, was really more because of the notion of stardom we have, in all fairness, also. Yeah, as in any, a star then can be any person really in a public limelight, etc. And there were long periods, by the way, when nobody spoke of her. In fact, somebody was asking me that even when she passed away, very few people remembered her because there were long hiatuses that she took from cinema. And even with regard to the media, etc., she was quite guarded in the way in which she engaged. She would not necessarily. There were some people who were craving that attention, who wanted to be out there, who wanted to do the Lux photo shoots. I guess she did not want to do those things. So, yes. And
No, I just, I think they've answered about the stardom and the thing, but I just want to talk about the premise of the question, that the good performance is where an actor becomes the character. I think there are so many kind of diffuse things that go around. I mean, I think somewhere, perhaps in a very distant way, this might have been drawn from some misunderstanding of Stanislavski, but no. I mean, no actor worth his or her salt would ever say, I become the character, right? So because the point is, if you become the character, you cannot perform anymore. The thing is, even when you are, it's not a question, it's like even when you are in whatever, method that you're doing, the point is you have to remember where the lights are, where your position is on the stage, what your cue is. Nobody becomes the character. It's absolute complete, I mean, I'm sorry, bunkum. No. The thing is also, the point is, this is exactly what Arundhati Devi is also addressing in the essay, which is that it's not the erasure of the actor's personality that creates a good performance. It is the singularity of the actor's personality that creates a good performance. And in that sense, what she is saying is not really that far from what a certain kind of Brechtian mode would be, which is an interpretation. The actor's role is to interpret to a degree, right? Except that she's also talking about affective embodiment, where both of these have to come together. A certain kind of intellectual interpretation, but also an affective. So I think it's much more complex than that, and I think we don't do it enough, but those of us who study these things should stop people when they say things like that. And don't say this. ऐसा नहीं होता है.
And actually, I mean, I suppose Arundhati was also responding to a conversation going around at that time. Maybe there are other articles by other people. But yeah, the actor has to do its labor. So it is interpretive work. But also the stardom about her is that so again, this is a loosely used term. So it is not the kind of stardom that one thinks about, let's say, even Suchitra Uttam. But in an industrial context, I would say that, let's say, poster chobi ache, loke poster dekhe ashbe film dekhte, that is a certain kind of a stardom. So these stardoms operate in different ways, but so one would have to read each case in that sense more critically.
The questions about the work of the archive, especially when we're talking about such an enormous aesthetic text that is Arundhati Devi herself, which goes beyond the star text, because she's also a multimedia artist, if we say, and in the Deleuzian sense, she's a philosopher. A director becomes a philosopher. So what do you think that the work or the labor of the archive then is, to sort of signpost this every mechanism that tried to make sure that she's lost but she's not, and the sort of bringing up but positioning her as this, as a figure of a philosopher? She's writing, she's creating, she's acting, she's deliberating, she's building, she's making, she's planning, she's maintaining, all of these things make her what we quintessentially think of a philosopher to be. So how do you think that the labor that the archivist must do, or the receiver of this lovely archive should sort of engage with those conversations?
Arundhati Devi actually came to films, I think, in the early 50s. And at the same time, even Suchitra Sen, Supriya Devi, Savitri Chatterjee and all. So early 50s is a time of nation building. So I think, like as you say, that they didn't had that much opportunity to groom as actresses, or there was no film acting schools and all. But Arundhati Devi, Suchitra Sen and all of them, they kind of, later on created a kind of Indian woman identity in the public space. So how much do you think that they had to create that, because they probably had two role models before them, Devika Rani and Kanun Devi, but they started much before them. But when in the 50s, how much of that, that women's identity in the public space and the kind of personality they have to become, that they contributed?
Because by and large, she is, if the few people who remember her as really an actress. So this aspect that she was also writing, she was, in music, that there was in fact so much thought that went into her direction. This is something we actually, yes, definitely there was a conscious effort to kind of bring it out for people. And I think that's something that guided her throughout her work. Yes, she was probably philosophical in that sense, and there was both a sense of cultural erudition as well as this sense of wanting to constantly remain within that kind of intellectually engaged field. So that is something I think that has been a conscious effort in our archives. I think that's the only way in which I can address it. I can't think of any other thing to say now.
Quickly, also to add about the archive, that I suppose this is not the archive, this is an exhibition. Right. The archive is a more living and more complex thing. And it is, I think it has to be constantly created in relation to, let's say, finding other clues, like a detective maybe, in making these connections. And always, there is this impossible archive where we would have the films that are lost somehow. I think this is an exhibition of her in action. But there's a larger question of archive, let's say really the script that is there, and let's say who writes the physical handwriting, or let's say the many details one can think through, and many hyperlinks of this archive. And about the woman in the public domain in the 50s, and I think it's women. So if we're talking about the actor as embodying a certain kind of a desire and labor, then I would also read films in not necessarily as Samajer Darpon. Rather I would look at it as something that is dealing with a complex situation. So in films, there is a way in which desire, complexities, or fears, apprehensions that come through, that may or may not actually be happening in the same way on the street. So films do not have any obligation to sort of be Samajer Darpon, So it is more interesting than, therefore, let's say the sleeveless blouse. The actors are wearing sleeveless blouse. are women necessarily wearing sleeveless blouses at that time? That is not a question that can be answered in a straightforward way. Especially with cinema, because of its industrial nature, labor, technology, it's the stories that it wants to tell, the music, the question of also, let's say, food that is involved, the people, the places where it is performed. It's a very complex kind of a moment that happens when a film is shot. So, ফিল্মের কোনো দায় নেই অ্যাকচুয়ালি, যে যা ঘটনা ঘটছে তাকেই, ইটস নট নিউজ, ওর নিউজও অ্যাকচুয়ালি যা ঘটে তা দেখায় না, বাট দ্যাট অ্যাসাইড it is not about what's actually happening in the 50s, but a kind of a crisis. মানে 1955-তে যখন ম্যারেজ অ্যাক্ট আসছে, সবাই কি ডিভোর্স হয়ে যাচ্ছে? হচ্ছে না, কিন্তু ফিল্মের পর ফিল্ম, মিস্টার অ্যান্ড মিসেস 55, গুরুদাত, ফিল্মের পর ফিল্ম ক্রাইসিস, যে ডিভোর্স হয়ে যাচ্ছে। চলাচলে দেখলাম কাগজের বিয়ে। সো yeah, so it is a larger kind of a apprehension crisis, social dilemma, many things that are coming together, I would say.
Oh God, yes, to contact us if is needed. No, but there's people who have, the thing is, there are more and more people who are also, writing on these subjects. And I know, like, in the course of this particular project, I've also found out people, in fact, who've already been interested in the figure. It's also about being just able to access information. Suppose, that's become really the issue. So, which is why, again, the need for the archive and to kind of showcase everything. And here I'd like to add also that there's a way in which this archive is housed in the New Alipur home of Tapan Sinha and Arundhati Devi. And we are keen to, as I said, eventually digitize it so that if anybody does want to access it later on, they can. This is not something that we want guarded just for ourselves. So I just wanted to add with the archiving thing, the one thing we were constantly trying to figure out while we were doing this project is, since Arundhati did neatly maintain and label many things, etc., we wondered whether she did in some ways actually build a kind of collection of her own. But the thing is that, the other deal that we realized was that there were many people in that generation who were meticulous about preservation, etc. And it's just the way in which they worked. It's also coming from a certain kind of middle class background, being careful about money, being careful about, okay, if I'm running a production house, I need to know where what is going, what correspondence, all files need to be maintained and things like that. So there's a more practical way in which probably that generation did this. Today, when we look back on it, yes, it feels more like an archive, or yes, it's great that we've now got some information and inherited it. I don't think there was any kind of conscious way in which she built it. It's more, of course, the way in which we are choosing to present this at this particular exhibition. So, yeah. So on that note, I think we will probably close. There's one person I did want him to speak here, is Shomik Babu. Since you're here and you watch Cholachol, if you can even say a bit on this.
Just one little thing. The point that I've told Tapati and Mrinalini, both of them, that I'd love to watch as many of the films that I could, in whatever shape or condition they may be, because I know that they are in very poor condition. And only then I would love to talk about Arundhati's performance, her role, her presence, whatever. The only thing that I felt in the last few years of her life, when I came into contact with her and did one long interview and some conversations leading up to the interview, one of the reasons why she virtually withdrew from acting or even producing, whatever. Production had other problems, of course. She was not a fighting, aggressive woman to get into the business and the industry of filmmaking. She had a presence, she had a personality, and even the little thing that comes out that when a producer wants to change her film, she takes a position which would be quite daring, and a lot of male directors would just concede to that because there's money, investment, etc., etc. She had the guts to say, no, I take my name off. So with that spirit, really to get into the act of producing, making films at that point was virtually impossible for her. But even withdrawing from acting, and there were cases when roles came her way and she said no, she was really feeling that with her sensibility, with her thinking about cinema over the years, she was not getting her space, her independent space, even to perform, even to act. And there was a little bit of a pain somewhere that the other cinema, as we were calling it then, and which was present already in the mid-50s, Mrinal Sen, Satyajit Ray, Hrithik, somehow she never had a chance to perform for them. So the other cinema with which she identified more emotionally, intellectually, I would say, and she was not part of that. She was classed, she was categorized with the older cinema. Even this whole evening, whenever we talk about her, we are talking about Kanun Devi and Chandravati Devi and Suchitra Sen. These are the references come along. And even in the case of Shupriya got mentioned a number of times, but Shupriya had worked with Hrithik and wonderful work. So, but somehow Arundhati is always in the other sector. And this hurt her. And she felt it quite strongly. And that was, I felt in our conversations, but one of the reasons why she withdrew. And she wouldn't even go into film ceremonies, occasions, the razzmatazz. You can see an earlier Arundhati playing cricket, but later in her life, she wouldn't even go to the big festivals, etc., never come into the forefront, retain a kind of a distance. So there was this pain, and so maybe, and also the fact that those who watched Rai, Sen and Ghatok wouldn't watch Arundhati Devi. And that she felt. And I could feel that. So I think we owe it to her to take a fresh look at her films and have this archive around and explore this archive. We're so grateful to these two ladies. Wonderful work, and we're so grateful to you. And that gives us an opportunity to take a look, because she was very, very different. And the only other person with whom I could compare her in a way, and that's also a woman who should be studied, is Chandravati Devi. And both of them had the same Shantiniketan connection. And both had the pride of having sung for Rabindranath. Both of them took great pride in that. And one of the lost films, Desher Mati, a remarkable film, gone, no sign of that. But we saw it at one of the Calcutta Film Society's screenings in the 60s. And I have very, very clear memories of that. And it's a fabulous film where a group of young men and one woman, Chandravati, the others are Shoilin Chaudhuri, Pankaj Mollik, Durgadas Banerjee, they decide, these young people, moderns in the city, that they have to go to a village. And if they could bring modernity to the village, give them the chance to live the life that we live in the big city and we enjoy. Give them a chance. So they make it a mission and they go to that village. This whole group, Chandrabhuti, Durga Das, Shoilin Chaudhuri, Pankaj Mullik. And the way they try to meet and share their life. And there is an, maybe completely unreal, but a fabulous cinema experience in the film when you have the interior of a typical village home with a large sprawling uthon and Krishna Chandra De teaching his daughter, played by Uma Shoshi, to sing. So they sing together. Krishna Chandra and then Uma Shoshi. Uma Shoshi just learning, picking up and singing. And while they're singing, Pankaj Mullik, who has come from the city and trying to make contact, he's outside. He listens to them singing. He stands for a while and adds a verse to the song from outside. And Krishna Chandra and Uma Shoshi are thrilled, who is the singer, who joins in. So even that, it's very, very unreal and cinematic at the same time, where the sound, the music, they bring the outsider and the insider together. That's the first contact. They can't talk to these people. They speak another language. They don't like these people from the city who have come in a car. But suddenly the song and sharing a song, adding to the song, contributing to the song. And there you see Chandrabhuti playing a role exactly like Arundhati. A modern urban woman, very, very sensitive, trying to reach out, trying to make contact with these women that she has never known. But all these are lost. So maybe if through a recovery of Arundhati's films, even these, another generation, another class of actresses coming into the scene to explore the possibilities of what they could have given and not just carry out whatever melodramatic demands the male directors made from them. So even thinking of that would be wonderful.
And I just wanted to mention one very small anecdote, by the way, since we are on the subject of actresses. I've been looking for Arundhati's interactions with other actresses. And the one thing, in fact, that comes into being and which actually ties this session well is Oshit Sen in his memoir, in fact, talks about an incident where people are making fun of Sabitri Chatterjee because of her Bangal accent. Oshit Sen has no idea that Arundhati, in fact, has any roots in Dhaka, Bangladesh, etc. And suddenly he mentions that Nuku comes out of her studio. They called her Nuku. And she suddenly starts defending Sabitri and she said, Maya, tumi dekhiye dao, ittadi. And they're all stunned that, she has these sorts of connections. Oshit Sen said that that's the day I discovered that she even has, that she's Bangal, etc. But there are these small moments through which I think there is little moments of sisterhood that I found. But I'm actually, the one thing that, again, this archive could do with is to know more about Arundhati's interactions with the other actresses. So, but on that note, I'll just pass it on to Ma.
There's also this anecdote that the songs that she was using in Chuti, that one of them was possibly sung by Angur Bala earlier. She actually went through the process of getting her permission, something that surprised even Angur Bala, that the fact that she did not want to deny any woman the kind of her own kind of priority and things. So I think that's important. I think it's been a very, very enriching session. We had a bit of a fiasco yesterday without a mic. Today it was made up for it. It's my pleasure because both Madhuja and Trina were in some ways students of the institution where I worked. Trina later became my colleague, and you got one thing wrong. Trina is a product of a PhD from Jadavpur University, and I think this has to be highlighted, that some of the best PhDs can still be done in this city. And we're very proud that Trina and Madhuja did her RTP, a program which has now been revived, and Trina was our PhD student. So thank you very much.
No, we so far don't have any more screenings lined up, but I'm doing walkthroughs on most evenings at 5:30, so please let your friends know. We have some merchandise, in fact, before you go out. If you're interested in posters or prints from the archives, you are free to, in fact, look at the merchandise section. Thank you for being a really patient audience.